Hi guys, if you have questions, email me or write a comment.
Hi again. Today we're going to talk about basic trigonometric equations. So how am I going to solve a trigonometric equation? Before you do that, you have to remember few basic things that we talked about before. We need to remember the quadrants. All students takes calculus. In the first quadrant, all are positive. In the second, only sine is positive. Third, tan is positive. And fourth, cosine is positive. And also we need to remember that these quadrants means that sine 30 has the same value as sine 150. For example, sine 30 in this case is equal to half, and same thing, sine 150 equals half also. So we have to keep this in mind. And also we need to keep in mind that the terminal side in trigonometry does not only represent one angle like 30. It's not only 30, it's also the coterminal angle 390, the negative coterminal angle like 330, and so on, of course. Not only these. These are infinitely many angles. And how did we use to represent this? We used to write it as theta equal 30 plus 2n times 360, number of rotations, or by using gradient, which is the more common way to write. So it will be pi over 6 plus 2n pi, and of course where n represents any integer. Okay, n belongs to integers. Now, if you recall all these information, you will be able to solve trigonometric equation. Let's have a look at this. Find all solutions. Look at this. It says find all solutions. So you have to find all the values of theta that makes this equation true. Now, let's have a look at this. Sine theta equals half. What's the first thing that I have to look at? I have to look at the sign. Is it positive or negative? Well, it's positive half, which means I'm talking about angles in first and second quadrant. Which angle? The angle that its sine is equal to half. So in this case, I'm talking about angles in first and second. So if I'm in the first quadrant, then I'm talking about, what's the reference angle for this? Theta prime is equal to 30 degrees. So I'm talking about 30 degrees. So I'm either having 30 degree in the first quadrant, or I'm having 30 degree in the second quadrant. 30 degree in the second quadrant means we are talking about 150 degrees. So sine theta equals half represents either 30 or 150. Is that all? Actually, no. It also represents any coterminal angle with 30 and any coterminal angle with 150. So what's the solution in this case? In this case, theta will be equal to 30 and the coterminal angle of 30, which is 390, and more than that as positive angles. Same thing as negative. It will be negative 330 and it will be another 360 for that, negative 690, and so on. So what's the solution in this case? In this case, theta will be equal to 30 plus 2n pi. But that's not the only solution. Keep in mind that we are still talking about 150. So also we have 150 and its coterminal angles. So theta is equal also to 150 plus its coterminal angles, 2 and pi. I'm using pi here while it should be 360. So let's write 360, 360. And now we need to write the general solution in terms of radian degrees. So my solution will be, the first solution, theta equals pi over 6 plus 2n pi, where n belongs to integers. And the second solution, theta will be equal to 150 is pi over 6 times 5, so 5 pi over 6 plus 2n pi, also where n belongs to integers. This is the first simple equation. I hope that the idea is clear. We only need to recall the basic information that we talked about before. Let's try to have another example. Okay, another example to be, for example, 2 cosine squared x minus 7 cosine x plus 3 equals 0. How am I going to do this? Well, this looks like a quadratic equation, so how would I do that? Think about it as a quadratic equation. We have cosine squared, cosine. If you remember, we used to apply something here, like think about it as 2y squared minus 7y plus 3 equals 0. And you will be able to factorize this. How do you factorize it? This is 2y and y. Positive means same signs like the midterm, so minus minus. 3 and 1. 3 is here and 1 is here. This will work. So negative 1y, negative 6y, that's negative 7y. But actually, I'm not talking about y. We need it to be cosine. So I'm just trying to help you. You can jump immediately if you are able to do that. This means we have 2 cosine x minus 1 times cosine x minus 3 equals 0. Now each bracket equals 0, so cosine x equals half, or cosine x equals 3. Now we need to think the same way as we did with the first example, but there is something obvious here in this one. Cosine x here is equal to 3, and we know that cosine can never have a value greater than 1 or less than negative 1, so immediately for this case there is no solution. So the only case that we need to think about is cosine x equals half. Now we have to think, what's the reference angle that has cosine equals half? And we have to notice that cosine is positive here. So I'm talking about which quadrants when cosine is positive? First and fourth quadrant. So in this case, I have cosine equals half, so the reference is 60 degrees. So I'm talking about either 60 degrees in the first quadrant or 60 degrees as a reference in the fourth quadrant. What does this mean? What are the solutions? Let's have a look. So it's 60 and all its coterminal angles, positive and negative. And in this case, it's 300 with all its coterminal angles, positive and negative. So a solution will be theta equals 60 plus 2n 360, or 300 plus 2n 360. And as I said, this is not the final answer, since the final answer should be in radian. So theta is equal 60 is pi over 3 plus 2n pi, and 300 is actually 60 times 5, so it will be 5 times pi over 3 plus 2n pi, and in both cases n belongs to integers, n belongs to integers. Well, this is the idea actually. It's the same as solving any equation that you used to do before. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is the quadrants and the coterminal angles, and of course positive and negative. These are the keys in solving trigonometric equations.
Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and write your questions via email or comments.